Hello all, welcome to, I've said this a couple times already, but welcome to our fourth featured artist talk with Lucha Rodríguez. I'm Joe, I'm the communications coordinator at the Wassaic project, and I also run all of our artist interviews. This is a series, again, the fourth in a series of artist talks that we are running in support of our 2020 summer exhibition. Lucha has an interview with us, with me, featured in that exhibition, which also is in book form and is officially printed and out in the world now and shipping out. That is available on our website. This talk will consist of roughly 20 minutes of conversation between Lucha and I, and then we will open it up for roughly 40 minutes of Q&A from all of you. When we reach the Q&A portion of the talk, we're going to use the hands raised feature or hand raising feature of Zoom. So I'll open the floor for questions, and then if you have a question, click on, there's like a raise my hand button thing. Click that, and then I will, if there's like 3 people, I'll be like, all right, you go first, take yourself off mute and ask your questions so that we don't have people talking over one another and we can get to everybody in turn. You can also feel free to just message the chat at any point if you have a question, and I will relay that to Lucha, whichever you prefer. Let's get into it. Lucha Rodríguez is a Atlanta-based artist and former printmaker. We'll get into that. I'm not exactly sure the degree to which you still do printmaking. In any case, Lucha was an artist in residence with the Wassaic project in September 2019. Again, I got the chance to meet her and interview her while she was in residence then. And as I was just telling her before this call, I've had some follow-up questions queued up pretty much since then. So I'm very, very excited to get the chance to ask those and to talk about what she's been up to and working on in the months since. You ready to go, Lucha?
Yeah.
Great.
So excited to have this opportunity, really, and just to see everyone and share about the work, even though it's just, we're just going to show it through RGB light technology, but still, you can still have some art in your life.
Yeah, your work is, when we had to not do a physical in-person show, I was particularly bummed that people wouldn't be able to see your work in person, but I still think it translates well to an online form. But it's like, really, if you get a chance in the future to see Lucha's knife drawings in person, you should absolutely take it. So speaking of those knife drawings, can you talk about the process behind making the knife drawings?
So the knife drawings are these compositions that I make on a single sheet of paper. And to me, it was a game changer. Instead of just looking at paper as a substrate, looking at it, just turning it to the side and see, oh, this has steps to it, something that I can actually carve into and use more of this molding material that I can manipulate to do whatever it is that I want, instead of just doing ink on surface or drawing on surface. Mm-hmm. So to me, I was very interested in just all the different processes that I was doing as a printmaker when I went to school at the Savannah College of Art and Design, doing my master's there. That, you can do screen printing, you can do etching, you can do embossing, you can change the surface of the paper, you can have indentations, you can actually print just over on the surface or infuse the ink through it. Mm-hmm. So that opened up my mind. It's like, okay, I can definitely manipulate the depth of it and use it as a plane. And I wanted to go back to basics and come up with my own idea of what a line could be, right? Thinking about the paper as the main material, the main source that would control line, form, and color. I was just like, paper is just going to be the star of this. I wanted to have all the power. So, okay, if I have one color, how much of it I can control just by manipulating the paper, instead of just using just different colors. And I just wanted to be about paper and surface. So how can I create lines with these? I was just thinking about the thickness of the material, and I started making marks with a knife. So these are actually small marks for those that haven't seen the work in person. They're actually just tiny superficial cuts. And I think, Joey, you can show maybe like the circular one that it's in the show for Wassaic, so people can actually have an idea of what the work looks like.
Sharing my screen now.
So yeah, this is one of the knife drawings that it's included in the Wassaic summer exhibition that's virtually and also book format, the book that Joe just showed you, and it's available for purchase too. And so yeah, these are just tiny little cuts that are helping you see the sort of gradient around the circle that it's just manipulating light. You can see they're just so little tiny ones that I cut with my knife, and it's just with an ergonomic handle because I have to spend so much. It's about surface. It's about just controlling everything, and it's more of this drawing that is also existing in physical space. It's not only pictorial space. It's actually something that it acts a little bit more like a sculpture almost, that it's, you know, interacting with that physicality of light that's so important to me.
Yeah. Can you, with this piece in particular, talk about how you create texture with the individual knife cuts? Because I remember the first time I saw this piece, my first reaction was like, how did you make that gradient? So, I mean, the simple version of that question is, how did you make the gradient, and how do you approach like building that part of it?
Well, I actually spent a lot of time by windows or outside really playing with light. I would just fold paper just to see how it reacts, and the different folds are gonna give me different shadows, hard shadows, subtle shadows. So it's basically just trial and error in seeing how I can communicate and control light on that paper. And so these marks just sort of starting to happen because I was thinking about, you know, just drawing. So it was a very natural gesture for me to do these sort of little jumps, almost like just writing and drawing. But yeah, just the angle that I use, it's just based on all the different little experiments that I do to seeing what happens really. And the different angles just give you different shadings. And I did so many of these. This is like my 50th attempt to try and do a gradient.
I assume you're laughing a little bit right now. I assume that not all of the gradient attempts were entirely successful.
No. I think I only have like 20 actual nice drawings, like official. And then and then when I go through all the experiments, it's just like tons and tons of paper and little things that I cut.
Yeah. You also mentioned earlier that moving towards doing the knife drawings shifted your relationship to color a little bit as well, sort of like stripping back and working with one color rather than sort of a bunch of colors, and sort of, you know, reducing the work in some sense to the essential. Maybe that's not the exact way you put it, but what I want to ask is why this specific shade of pink that recurrently shows up in a lot of the work? It feels like sort of a silly, simple question, but yeah, how do you relate to that color pink that shows up in a lot of your work?
Yeah, so I really wanted to understand every single thing that I'm adding, every single element that I'm doing into the work. So, okay, I have white paper. How can I understand this paper and its surface and its depth? And then it was color. I have been working with different shades of the color pink as it relates to the sense of touch, you know, and then just like that inner world, inner space. And it has to be a light sort of this pastel pink, because the light has to show and the shadows have to show. So I was just mixing different sort of colors and seeing sort of with my range of vision too. If you have red, then you can read so much more than with green. For some reason, I was just doing different experiments, and it's like, okay, I have a wider range with the red. And when they start sort of like with this yellow, and then they start trickling almost to red, but not really. So it was just sort of that range that really gave me the best results. And conceptually, it's about the same thing. It's about people just looking at the work, and they have to stay in this sort of intimate inner world, almost like this one-on-one relationship that it's about sense of touch and sight. So that shade just works perfectly.
Great. I also want to ask about something you mentioned earlier as well, that the drawings become almost sculptural in a way. I think they're rather very sculptural. But you have also done more like explicitly site-specific sculptural work with paper. So can you talk about how the knife drawings sit alongside that work in your practice? Have you moved away from doing the site-specific larger work on paper? Do you still see it as a core part of your practice? How do they sit next to each other, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, I used to make a lot of site-specific installations that would also be with paper, but also plastic, plexi, mirrors, and also with sound elements. And it was just about invading the whole space and transforming it. But it was also about the activation of light, the applied pigment, but also just the suggestions of colors that were not actually there or applied to surface, but it was more about the manipulation of light in some ways, and overlapping things to create the color. So if, I was very aware of space and dimensionality and shadows, even when I was creating these rooms. And I would actually do drawings and smaller works at that time, but I just wasn't happy with my smaller works for a while. So I was just doing all of these things that were more site specific because I was still developing the language for the knife drawing. But then once I had it, then I just switched over to the knife drawings, which are also very time consuming. But yeah, it's about light, it's about space and surface. So I think it's, without making those installations, I don't think I would have been able to understand the visual language that I'm using with the knife drawing. So,
do you think you'll ever return to installations like that, sort of drawing on what you've learned in the knife drawings, or do you feel pretty much at home working with the knife drawings and at that scale?
I'm very open. I'm always just seeing what the work wants me to do, really. Just letting the work dictate the narrative that it has to, that it has to follow. But you can see here, like you can see like from the background a little bit, that's the wall. And then I have a series of paper circles, and it's almost like this study that I'm doing with the knife drawing. I was sort of just mimicking it to study the light, how it hits the paper, and how it transforms the sequence of circles. So even though I work small and I say that the knife drawings are the work, while I'm in the studio, I work big, and I also make sort of these wall experiments that just hang on walls and everything. So yeah, I'm always doing 2D, 3D. And then whatever I feel is the final work, it's the one that I show. But through my process, I'm constantly building things. So it's not separate.
How do you know when you have arrived at like, this is the piece I want to show, this piece is done? Like, how do you, I imagine making tens of thousands of cuts over and over on the paper, it's hard to exactly know like the boundary between overworking a piece and underworking a piece. So how do you relate to that?
I definitely follow my gut there. Sometimes I plan a piece and it's okay, this is the way the work has to look. And I have a sketch and I'm really excited. And then I execute it, I look at it and I'm not excited about it and I don't feel like it translates what I want to say, then I just discard it. I'm not really attached to producing final work if you know, if they are not conveying, they don't have the energy that I want them to have. So I just really go with my gut all the time. It's like this work is done, it's finished, like I can move on. And then if it's not done, then it, you know, I just have this energy that I want to continue to remake that same piece. So
remake the same piece, as in, do you, just to clarify, will you like make duplicates of the same piece, or
to sort of like develop the idea again, you know, that same idea. Let's say with the circle, it was the same thing. Like I couldn't achieve what I wanted to with the circle, so I just go and repeat.
Great. I also want to ask about something that you mentioned like at the way beginning. You said it was a game changer to switch to the knife drawings. Can you talk about like that specific moment, or like what happened when you realized that you could relate to the paper as a surface in that way? Like, what was there a particular moment where you were just like, oh, wow, I can do this? Or was it something that really developed over time? Like, fill in the narrative for me a little bit.
So I was actually cutting larger pieces of paper with my knife. And then I was just switching blades, and I was testing out the blades on a little tiny sheet of paper to sort of like making marks to see if if it was still sharp, if the blades could keep going or not. And then I just looked at that piece of paper with all the little marks, and I was just like, this is so like, this is what I need to do and investigate. When I looked at it, it was like, and I was just fascinated by it. It really just opened up my mind, and I was just so curious to see if I could control it. And it took me actually 3 years after to really, after just testing on different papers and with different blades, to really come up with sort of like the first knife drawing. I wasn't trying to use watercolors. I used pastels, I used crayons, and yeah. I was really in a bad mood because I was frustrated because I knew there was something there that I had to explore. It's like, okay, the paper and the depth of the paper, and it's like this horizontal plane. I have to open it up to create lines. How can I do this?
Yeah.
So yeah, that was my white whale for a while.
Can you talk a little bit about what the like quote unquote like hunt for that white whale was like? Like, can you fill in a little bit more of those 3 years for me? Like what it was like to go through the process of like arriving at what you've now relatively settled on as the way that these get made. Like what the failed experiments looked like how you got there.
Well, it's like when you're learning a new language too, you know. At first, I couldn't even make one cut without tearing the whole thing apart, and the paper would just go through. And every time I tried to lift it, I would actually bend the paper or fold it. And I knew that that was compromising sort of like the integrity that I wanted for the work. I didn't know what it looked like, but I knew that it had to be this soft transition of opening up the planes within the surface of the paper. So yeah, just tearing the paper, it wasn't the softness that I needed to, and I couldn't really control the light as much with the tears there because I didn't have the continuity that I needed to create the transition of shadows and colors. And with pigments too, acrylics didn't work, oil, and also how the paper was reacting to it. It was just too much curling of the paper. Then I tried different things, pressing paper, but until I found just doing with watercolors. And yeah, it was just going through all my supplies, basically everything that I had in the studio. It's like, okay, let's try this. Let's try a new formula, and just like switching one of the elements of the formula. Pigment. Let's try all the pigments I've got. So yeah, it's just being in the studio and having, you know, time with your work. That's what really helps it develop at the end of the day. So
Yeah, absolutely. I want to be mindful of the time. We are about 20 minutes in, so I want to open this up to other people's questions if y'all have them. Again, we're going to use the raise hand feature of Zoom. So if you have a question, just click that and then you can raise your hand. And if at any point you want me to like bring up a specific work or share my screen so that you can like look more at a specific piece, just send me a message and I can absolutely do that. So yeah, does anybody have any questions?
Hi, I'm just raising my real hand. I don't know if there's a virtual hand. So nice to see you. I had a question, because like looking at those circles manipulated in the back of you, and then having seen these cut pieces, I'm just struck by the extremity of scale in which you're working, like things that are so minuscule and then things that are like repetitive and kind of taking up an expansive part of the wall. And I'm just wondering if you have any examples of how those extremes in scale have they informed the other in any way, or is there any medium go between? So it's kind of a two-part question. One is that, do the extremities of scale in which you work inform the other, and is there an example? And then the other is there some space in between that you've explored as well?
So there's no medium for me, really. I either work really small or I take up the whole room, really. But it has to do with light and how I control it. So I wanted to have work that was more portable for me. So you know, with the knife drawings, I contained them with a sheet of paper, with a single sheet of paper. That was important to me. When I do the large installations, I'm also using either just one roll of paper, a continuous roll of paper that I start cutting up, and it's sort of a translation of the material and how it comes. You know, if it comes in raw, I'll just use the whole thing and translate that onto a wall. So the scale is because of the material and how it comes when I get it, really. And as far as these circles are based actually on the gestures of the knife drawings, and I'm glad that particularly you have seen them in person up close, so that's great. And so yeah, it's always about sort of studying these sort of gestural and shapes that I do at different scales and see how it reacts when you can get more or less surface exposed to light. So yeah, it's always an experiment of just looking. I'm always just looking intensely at things, at light.
We had a question or a raised hand earlier from Grace Hager. If you take yourself off mute whenever you want and ask your question if you still have it.
Hi, thank you. I really like what you just said, Lucha, about like looking always at light. Just listening to you talk about your practice and particularly how you're talking about light, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how or if science relates to your work, because your practice sounds so thorough that you're almost working through every variable that could affect the light. And this concept of color and light brings me to a very physics of light space. And so wondering if you have any thoughts on that, or whether that's relevant to your practice at all.
Thank you. Thank you, Grace. Thank you for the question. So there's definitely some sort of observation that I do. I actually have prisms in the studio. I look at the light and at the whole spectrum and how it actually reflects on different, like the wall or the ceiling. I sort of follow this. I've seen to sort of like the whole thing, how light is bouncing off and different charts and physics and all of it, but I try to do it more organically in a way that I just pick information and bites of information here and there without really sort of worrying too much about it and just letting art dictate the way I interact with light. And just every step of the process, it's different for me. When I'm intensely looking at light, I also look at the temperature of it and how it affecting the white of the paper, if it's changing, if I need like a warmer light or just cooling down the paper. But yeah, it's sort of like this organic relationship that I have with light, but I just use art pretty much as the way to understand it.
Awesome, thank you.
Can I ask a quick follow-up, Lucha?
Yeah.
Can you talk about how your relationship to light has evolved over time, having done like many of these knife drawings?
I think that just being in college, and when you're in drawing classes, you have to kind of like squint your eyes and start looking at just the shading of things so you can translate it with charcoal. Those assignments were really hard for me. I was just like, oh, I can't really capture the whole light, the whole thing. And that I just got obsessed with those when I was in school, just trying to just do these charcoal drawings with volume. And that sort of helped my eye training in a way, just doing this, looking at things. And then I got obsessed. I was at the coffee shop and I would just do this and try to just draw everything that was around me, just with volume, capturing volume. And it's been just so beautiful when you know that there's this physical thing that it's just everywhere, on every, bouncing off of every surface, and that we have lenses in our eyes that are just sort of like capturing everything bouncing off to create all the images. So I'm very aware of the physicality of light, and also of the viewer who is going to experience the work. It's I'm really aware of the positioning of the person that's going to be to sort of like looking at the shapes and having these sort of differences and nuances as you move, and that you can only experience when you have the work in front of you. So I think that comes from making the large installations, really, where I was thinking about wayfinding and trying to have people follow this sort of path and illuminating with the gallery light where they should walk and the path that they should follow to experience the installation. So, yeah, I've been working and thinking about light for a really long time now. Yeah, the physicality of light and our physicality as well.
Right, thank you. We have another person with their hand raised. Poppy, if you could take yourself off mute and ask your question.
Hello. I was wondering, do you start off with drawings, or do you just get your hands dirty straight away? And how do you decide on the scale? Can you hear me?
So, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Cool.
No, I can. Yes. So I do a lot of sketches at first, just to practice and to get the right shapes that I want to investigate at certain times and certain effects that I want to learn how to make through the knife drawing. So I do. I actually have some here.
Right.
And when I do the sketches, I actually have arrows. So I know in which direction I want the cut to be to create the separations and the lines that I need. If I don't do this, then it's just gonna fall apart. So it's a lot of prep work before I start making one of the knife drawings, because each line, it's actually just sort of like this visual perspective that you have when the light is sort of hitting that corner and creating it in your eyes, when it's actually just one shade of the same color. But and then as far as scale, it's just using different blades, and when I use different blades, then I get different sort of marks. And I have, I don't know if you can see, different cuts that I make, and that's gonna give me different results. But definitely, it has to do with the tool that I'm using that creates the mark and the size.
Right. Have you ever thought of using like very, very thin wood?
Yes, actually, I used to do a lot of wood carving and lino cuts when I was doing more printmaking things. So I think it has to do with sort of that background that I'm used to, just carving into surfaces a lot, and also with etching, where I was almost just like drawing and just doing all of these sort of small marks onto the copper plate. So I think it's because of that. It's because I'm used to preparing plates and prints that this sort of developed.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have another follow-up question, Lucha. I'm wondering, can you fill in a little bit more about your journey as a printmaker and sort of more specifically, your transition from printmaking to the knife drawings? Like what you were just talking about, starting with wood carvings and, exploring printmaking techniques and how that has bled its way into the work is really interesting to me. And so if you could like fill in a little bit more of that, that'd be great.
So I actually wanted to be a painter. Really, I wanted to go to school for painting. But then I saw the facilities at SCAD, and then I saw that they had all of this there, and I just got very curious, and I just had to get my hands on it, on the machines and the presses and the letterpress and everything there. And because before that, I studied graphic design, so I already had this relationship to paper, and I was very interested in doing minimal designs that were just embossed, like blind embossed, no ink, nothing, just popping onto the surface of the paper. So I actually got into letterpress a lot because of that, just sort of like the indentations onto the paper. And once you sort of print each letter, then you have all the indentation of the whole thing. And it has this beautiful tactile quality to it. Once you receive an indentation that has been letterpressed, you just like, you read it with your hands too. It's just it's a different experience. It's great. And I dabbled with letterpress and then also screen printing, and that was very graphic. I was just using fluorescent inks that I had to wear sunglasses when I was printing. They were so bright. So it would just tire my eyes very quickly. And it just helped me so much to prep the material, to prep the paper and understand the permeability of the paper too, because I was also printing on plastics and seeing how paper behaved and having that contrast of printing t-shirts, printing, whatever I could get my hands on. I would just do that with screen printing. It gave me that flexibility to do that. So I was very aware of just how the ink was getting onto the surface, and it was just sitting there, you know. And when I used to cut it, then you can actually see the white border around it. So I was just like, okay, so it's just this superficial print that I'm making. So it's just making mental notes of everything and just looking. It's like, oh, if I do this, then paper reacts this way. If I treat it with that, it does this. And that sort of helps you build your own vocabulary of how to work with it.
Great, thank you. Does anybody else have any other questions? If so, raise your hand and I will tell you to come off mute. Andy.
Hey, Lucha, how's it going? It's good to see you. I think we discussed this before when you're at Wassaic, but I'm still curious, what's your relation to, maybe the right word is meditation, you know, you're very, there's just a lot of them. It's like, it kind of feels like the infinite at some point. So I'm just wondering, what is your relationship between, you know, these marks as maybe being meditation and also the infinite?
Hi, Andy. It's so good to see you. I'm a big fan of Andy's work. You should, you know, anyone that's here should also see Andy and Darren Martin's work, because they're both amazing. So yes, I walk this fine line between sort of like letting go but also being present, because I'm using a knife, so I can't just cut away until whenever, because I'm doing this dance with light at the same time with the knife. So yeah, it's this sort of very limited space that I can actually let go, but I'm very present to see light and what light is doing. But I also do other works that I just go into infinity and just like, I just do whatever I want. But those are more exploration. For the knife drawings, I'm very sort of present and I have to execute. So yeah, I don't visit the infinite with them, but with other ones I do. So yeah, it's amazing. And as far as just meditation and all of it, I love yoga. And actually, we did yoga at Wassaic, which was so amazing to be able to just be in the studio and do yoga and do a little bit of meditation in there. Yeah, it just fuels me, just having that time to do some self-reflection, definitely. And I feel it too when I'm working.
Does anybody else have any other questions? I should also note here that our next artist talk is actually with Andy. So here's the pitch for the wider series. I'll pitch that again at the end of this talk. But does anybody have any other questions for Lucha right now? If not, I have more questions. Okay, I'm going to ask one of my follow-up questions, Lucha. Where did I write it down? I have several pages of questions now. There was a point earlier where you said, no, this was in the first time that we talked. The first time we talked, you mentioned the phrase light traps a lot when you were creating these knife drawings. Can you talk specifically about that terms? I guess I'm specifically interested because you have sort of talked about relating to light in this, I don't know, somewhat like reverent way and like really respecting and sort of trying to take your time with light, but a trap sort of feels like an interesting word for that there. So can you talk about that phrase in particular?
Yeah. So I was thinking more in terms of you have a surface and then light is just gliding over it. And with every cut I make, it's sort of like I'm containing it somehow. And by containing it, I feel that I'm sort of just trapping it, just making that, so it's a way to look at it, and then I'm slowing it down too, you know? So instead of just having this smooth surface, I come in with my knife and alter the whole thing. So it has to do like this sort of staggering effect. That's why I refer to them as little light traps.
Can you also talk a little bit about your practice in the context of an art viewing world that has in recent months shifted to like online, not in-person viewing? I sort of gestured towards this at like the very beginning of the call, that like if you get a chance to see these pieces in person, do so, because they're so they're just really activated by the space, the particular space and the particular light, and like even the time of day that you're seeing them in. So I'm wondering like if you have any thoughts on what it's been like to have these mostly be seen in a digital realm now, how that's like has it affected the way you approach the work at all, anything like that?
It's very challenging. You are definitely flattening something down that is meant to have so much dimensionality. And like I say in the beginning of the call, through RGB light technology, you can't really experience the whole work the way it was intended to be experienced, you know, as you moving around it, you know, you just have this sort of flat surface in front of you. But it's been extremely challenging because my work relies on people actually going and being in a space with them. Mm-hmm. So I have been trying to do just sort of like little videos to truly explain how light behaves, and using video more as a tool to communicate the work instead of just one still. And but so I have been producing as much as possible and not really worrying about that other part. So it has really slowed me down a lot. You know, I was really bummed not to be able to share the work because, you know, either installation or knife drawings, for both you would need to be present at a certain space. So yeah, digital work is not really my thing, but I'm happy I can talk about the work and write about the work. And that's another translation of the art, you know, just being able to communicate it anyway, you know, through video or through opportunities like this one, that I have to verbalize what's visual. And it also helps me and it gives me clarity. So I'm just adapting. We'll see what happens if I come up with some sort of 3D thing, model of a knife drawing. We'll see.
Yeah, I remember when we were like first putting the book version of this show together, like I pretty much knew immediately, like, well, Lucha's interview has to be in there because like this work is so cool in person that like, and not being able to see in person, like we need to like go out of our way to like really like show the way that you're talking about it and approaching it. And yeah, I love that interview in particular. I was telling my friends about it for like weeks after I did it. We have another question in the chat from Annie Flynn. I will just read it out loud. So she's saying, "Hi Lucha, I'm in a shared studio space, so no audio, sorry. Thanks so much for all these wonderful insights into your incredible work. I was wondering if you could talk about any sort of research, quote unquote, you do for your work. It sounds like a lot of your practice is about materiality and experimenting, but do you have a way of learning from other artists or a way that you filter other ideas, books you read, things you see into your work? Do you keep a sketchbook or take pictures or any other kinds of records?"
That's great. Let me find the books. I have them right here. Okay. I'll be right back. I recommend reading Anne Hamilton's Corpus. This is a beautiful essay. Love Anne Hamilton's work. This was done for a mass MoCA installation that was done there. So I really enjoyed just reading at different essays of different artists, like this one in particular, if you find it. It's called Anne Hamilton's Corpus, and the essay is by Lawrence Rabb. Definitely recommend. Also, fantastic reality. And this one's about modern art and also Louis Bourgeois' story. And I just find it fascinating. And also, when I do research about this paper, I do a lot of sort of paper folding and everything, but I go to different books as well to see how it's done. This one is all paper sculptures by Richard Sweeney. And so I do a lot of just following different ways of folding paper, even though this paper is cutting and looking at the materiality of it, still folding it and seeing how other artists apply it, and it really opens up my own processes too, just to practice. But I do a ton of sort of just folding paper around, and I have so many of these that are just not really part of my body of work, but just to keep my hands moving and exploring. So yeah, those are sort of some books, and a classic about the color pink too. I love this book. It's by Barbara Nemeth, The Exposed Color in Contemporary Art and Culture, Pink. I love this book so much. It's highly, highly recommended. So yeah, I do a research about the material itself, paper, and also about color. I read about it through, through different artists and their experiences with it, and essays on specific bodies of work.
Can you talk about, so you mentioned earlier that like when you're working with a particular piece, it requires like a lot of physical focus to make all of the knife cuts. So can you talk about like how, it's a little bit of an abstract question, like how the research that you're doing in the background ends up bleeding into the process of making itself, when during that process of making you need to be like focused so much on the physicality, and it maybe is hard to like think about like the all the like essays that you've read and like the conceptual underpinnings when you just have to like make tens of thousands of cuts.
I do believe that by repetition, something sort of becomes part of you in a way. So I do a lot of exercises of just looking at things and feeling like, so once I have that part, that it's just the way I move with the knife, then I can think about other things, other elements of the work, and it makes me have more of a mental space. But at the end of the day, I think that these knife drawings are more of a tool to create these visual exercises for people to just have that moment where they are just appreciating something, that you're curious about, and you're open enough to approach it and start reading into it, looking at the surface. And I think that that's really what art's about. It's about helping you have a fuller life and, helping you see more. Anyway, if people go to one of my exhibitions and then they leave and they start walking and they see their shadows and they know their presence and how light is affecting the way they're moving, then I'm just happy. That's what it's all about for me, just having it as exercises as a tool.
Can you say a little bit more about how the work has affected like your own personal perception of like experiencing light in the outside worlds? Like we've talked about it mostly, I think, in the direction of like you see things on the outside world and that makes its way into the work. But can you talk about how making the work changes the way that you see your own shadow walking around or see the way light bounces off things, etc.?
Just walking outside in the street and then being able to look at the asphalt and to see textures everywhere. And I think that right now too, with the pandemic and everything, I think we're more aware of the sense of touch and how we're not able to touch certain things. But you can still see the textures and the materials. So it's like, okay, I know this newspaper box is metal. I think it could be warm. It depends on the weather and the light. If the sun is hitting that light box, the temperature of it. So it's just being aware of those things. And now that we can't really touch much when we are outside, it's just relate to things every day, I'm just open to seeing little color I'm just like hyper aware, like, oh, there's something there.
Great, thank you. I want to open it up for anybody else's questions. I know I went on a little bit of a follow-up question tangent there, but if anybody else has any other questions, please raise your hands and then you can take yourselves off mute and ask them. We have just a few minutes left here. But if nobody has any immediate questions, I have still more questions. One thing that you've touched on a few times, Lucha, are the plastic pieces that you've worked with in the past. And that to me feels sort of like an outlier in your practice. Like we've talked about paper and then how you're like arrived at the knife drawings through the printmaking lens, but can you talk about how the plastic pieces fit in and how you relate to that material specifically? And I'll pull up one of them.
Yes, and they're on my website. You can, if you go to plastics, you can pull those up and show. So I was using plastic more as paper with more resistance. I wanted to find something that was similar enough to paper in color and behavior, but it had so much resistance that actually helped me understand volume and depth a little bit better than just by working with paper. And I was also twisting and bending it. It had a different breaking point because it's a different material and it cuts differently than paper, but it just helped me understand so much more. You sort of need a contrast to understand something, right? If I work with something that's very rigid and heavy, then I can understand the things that are lighter and more flexible. And it just helped me expand my vocabulary and also learn about light and how it behaved on a different surface that wasn't paper, and that it was smooth, and that way I could actually see the shadows a lot better than with paper. And but yeah, I just wanted to continue to study paper as a material. That's why I use fabrics, I use copper, I use different things, but I always go back to paper. It's like I venture around, do other work, but my heart's always going back to paper for some reason.
Great. Does anybody else have any other questions? Let's see, we have one. We have a message in the chat from Poppy saying that I feel that Lucha's work would lend itself to laser cutting. Have you experimented with that in the past?
Yes, I did. I did a laser cut edition for the Scat Museum of Fashion, where it was all just laser cuts everywhere. I went crazy with that. I was just looking at all the different possibilities, everything that I could do. But at the end of the day, for me as an artist, it was a lot more rewarding to get my hands dirty, just doing it by hand and feeling the process of separation of the material itself and getting all the different layers instead of just burning it. I thought, I don't know, for me, it was a lot more delicate and doing it by hand. And I'm not really interested in making hundreds and thousands of the same one. I'm just doing one of a kind, not really editions anymore. So. But yeah, it's awesome. I love doing laser cuts.
I have one more question as well. So we were talking earlier about how it's a little bit tricky for you given that you can't really experience the work in person right now, but can you talk a little bit about how you approach lighting the work? It's a little bit of like a technical question, like how you approach lighting the work when you do show it in person, because I imagine that there's like a gap between the lighting conditions under which the piece is made and the lighting conditions under which the piece is shown. So I'm interested in how you approach that. Do you go for natural light? Do you just go for, do you light it artificially? How does that work for you?
So it's always an adventure for me. I never know how the work's gonna end up looking at certain galleries or museums. It's just like I just bring the work and we'll see how it reacts to the situation. It's almost like a person, you know, you react differently depending on the situation you're at. So I just use whatever lighting they provide and try to see it and make it happen as best as possible. And if you lose certain details, then that's just part of that environment, and I'm not really attached to that. It's almost really exciting for me to see that I could take pictures of the same work under different lighting conditions and spaces, and it looks different. So to me, it's rewarding. And it's that element of surprise. I never know what's gonna happen, but I'm always very sure of the effect that I'm gonna get. It's a matter of how intensely it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. But I always know that there's going to be a section that's going to be lighter and another section that's going to be darker. And I know that a gradient is going to happen. I just don't know to what, intensity it will show.
That's so cool. It's like one work takes on so many different characters when one of the main components to activate the piece is not on the physical piece itself.
Yes, I almost feel like I'm always just setting up the stage for light to just coming and start acting and doing the final touch of the piece.
Yeah. Wonderful. I want to be mindful of the time. If anybody else has any last questions, raise your hand now or forever hold your peace, because we are past 6 o'clock. We have one more message in the chat from Poppy saying that I live in Margate where the sunrises and sunsets are amazing. Lucha's work would look incredible at Turner Contemporary with the wonderful colors of the skies. I don't know Turner Contemporary in particular, but I guess that's interesting to me. Like, have you, insofar as, do you have particular thoughts on how the work is activated by like sunsets or sunrises or skies in different locations of the country? Like, yeah, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah. That's one of the reasons that I love doing residencies too, because I start working and then depending on where I'm at, the work looks different, than here in Georgia at a particular time of day. It could be lighter, it could be warmer. There's so many factors to you can't really replicated like exactly the same. And that flexibility of just you're working with someone else, it feels like. So I can never rely that it's going to be the same as in my studio, and that's the beauty of it. And with sunsets, I'm not sure. Not really. It might do a minimal tinting, I guess. It could be interesting to experiment with that too. We'll see.
We'll see. Oh, we do have a raised hand from Poppy. You can take yourself off mute and ask your question.
Oh, I will stop, I promise. No, the colours, in fact, Turner and I think Van Gogh as well loved the sunsets and the sunrises in Thanet, where I live. And you get things like not just pinks, but purples and reds and oranges. It's just amazing. And just imagining your work in that kind of setup is quite exciting for me.
It sounds fascinating. If I can get more purples into the work, it would be amazing to see.
Yeah.
I guess I have to put it on my list.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, just to let you know that there are more colors that the sunsets and the sunrises can bring you.
Definitely.
Anyway, I've enjoyed your work and your talk. Thank you. Thank you for
Thank you
letting
so
a Brit in.
Of course. Thank you for all the wonderful questions and all the interaction. I love it.
It's been great. Thank you.
And I want to thank everybody else in the call as well. We're a few minutes past 6, so I want to make sure that we're respectful of Lucha's time. And we head out. Thank you again, everybody, for joining our 4th featured artist talk with Lucha Rodríguez. Again, like I said earlier, our next talk is in 2 weeks from today with Andy Van Din, who is in this call and asked a question earlier. His work is also featured in the 2020 summer exhibition, and I'm very excited to talk about that as well. Again, like I said at the beginning, our 2020 summer exhibition is both online and in a book form. The book form features full spreads and photos of Lucha's work. I think it's sort of like the next best thing to seeing it in person, seeing it in like a really nice, well-printed hardcover volume. That's available on our website as well. I think that's everything. Thank you all so much for coming. And thank you in particular to Lucha for taking the time to talk. It was really, really great to pick your brain about your work.
Yeah, thank you so much. It has been great. I love anything that has to do with Wassaic, the Wassaic project. Everyone should go to the website and just learn more about Wassaic project. And buy the book. And buy the book, which is amazing.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to close the meeting. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Have a great rest of your Fridays, and we'll see you soon in 2 weeks for the next talk. Bye, all.
Bye. Thank you.